Thank you, Stuart. It's quite daunting, I think, to try and sum up what's happened over the last 8 hours in 3 or 4 minutes, but I'll give it a bash. I think one of the great things that today has done for me, and I'm sure has done for lots of others, is show us that actually there's still a lot of stuff for us to do, but we've managed to keep this going. And I think one of the fears that some of us had around the referendum itself and around the pressing and gutting time that was the 19th of September last year was, now what? And we are still here, we are still thinking, we are still speaking, we are still engaging, and we're still up for the fight, which is fantastic. So I think that's crucial, because without each and every one of you going back to your own communities, your own groups of people interested in changing Scotland, there wouldn't be much point for the Radical Independence Campaign or all the other groups associated with this movement. And I think also what today has done is highlight what we have achieved as a social movement. Kat Boyd upstairs a short while ago was talking about how important that movement to politics is. And I think that's something that we cannot afford to lose sight of. And I realise the irony of a party leader, co-convenor, saying that. I am entrenched in a political party machine, but I hope that I've got some ability of looking beyond that, looking to that movement to politics, which has brought us all together in Dundee today. I spoke at the start about how the establishment might have won the vote last September, but they've lost their stranglehold on us. They've lost their ability to control, not that they ever had the ability to control our minds, but they certainly have got pretty damn close, I think, to controlling what we thought was possible to think in politics. And that's changed. And that is what matters. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to take that capacity to think about politics differently, to think about how we interact with each system, whether it's our workplaces, whether it's our trade unions, whether it's our local governments or not so local governments, whether it's our national representatives in Holyrood or in Westminster. We need to think how we can make what we have now better before we get to the place where we have created something completely new. Because that is our end goal, I think. A new Scotland that treats every person as an equal, regardless of what part they play in the economy, what part they play in society at large. And part of that comes down, or probably most of that comes down to what we think about and how we enable and encourage participation in that process. And Rick does that. Rick is that's at the heart of what Radical Independence has been. And it's got to be true participation, not just tinkering around the edges of the systems we've already got. Participation is the lifeblood of any socially just society, and the lifeblood of any politics that claims any kind of legitimacy within that socially just society. So we need to be thinking about how we give power to people. And there are a whole range of things that I heard being discussed around today. We've talked about participatory budgeting, we've talked about community ownership of renewable resources, we've talked about completely transforming how we see work and actually taking control of our workplaces, really participating in the politics of the everyday. And I guess that brings me to elections, because that's definitely not the politics of the everyday. I don't want politics to be about going to a little polling booth somewhere, hopefully fairly close to where you live, but not necessarily anywhere near where you live, and putting an X in a box, or a 1 or a 2 or a 3 in a box every few years. That's not politics. That is what the establishment want us to think politics is, but that's not politics, and that's very, very apparent from the discussions we've been having today and the discussions that I think have been going on much more generally in Scotland over the last few months. A couple of weeks ago, Carolyn and I were at a Women in Politics event, and one of the things that we were asked as women in politics, what did we think mattered? What should we be doing to encourage others? And one of the other members of the panel, the president of Stirling Students' Association, Amy, she said the only reason that she was in politics was because somebody had asked her. And I think each and every one of us, perhaps women particularly, have a duty to make sure that we support and encourage people coming up behind us. We need to make sure that it's not just the people in this room who are back here again next year, but that we've dragged at least another person along with us, whether they are kicking or screaming or not. I think we need to make sure that we take responsibility for keeping this movement going, because without Rick, another Scotland is not possible. With us, it most certainly is. Thank you.
Folks, we're going to keep things moving. Our next speaker, a student at Dundee University, Caroline Leckie.
Thank you very much. This room's a wee bit scary. The last time I was in here, I was sitting a conveyancing exam. Believe it or not, which wasn't pleasant. I don't like to do conveyancing. Not at all. I've just come from Perth from a very successful first AGM of Women for Independence. We have formally constituted after nearly 3 years now of being a very organic, fluid, chaotic sometimes movement of women who decided to take control and their space in the referendum campaign because they were fed up waiting to be asked, and they were fed up waiting for permission to be included in the political life of our country, of which 52% of the population are women. And the referendum may be gone, but Women for Independence is also called Independence for Women. And again, organically, as a grassroots movement, it has developed into taking up issues of interest to women. I am a feminist. I would say the vast majority of women who have signed up to be part of Women for Independence would describe themselves as feminists. I think we've now got 767 women signed up to pay monthly standing orders as members, 4,000 plus on a mailing list, 20,000 followers on Twitter. And our development has shown that there is a big appetite amongst women for autonomous participation in politics, for autonomous representation in politics. And for many women who've been involved in politics in the past, myself included, impatience in terms of political parties, particularly mainstream political parties, taking the issue of feminism, gender equality, equal representation, and all of those things seriously enough to actually make it happen in their organisations. And so I'm here representing Women for Independence, offering solidarity. I think one of the great things about the independence movement is that very many offshoots of the wider Yes movement have developed in a very grassroots way, but in a complementary fashion. And for me, that offers a vision of what is necessary in terms of the future to create alternative, radical, progressive politics that can actually achieve change in Scotland. I think that structures of the past, centralised, hierarchical, top-down structures that inevitably exclude women will not do the job. And for us, looking at some examples to sisters across the world, in the Nordic countries, Sweden in particular, we are probably considering laying down the gauntlet to mainstream political parties and anybody involved in politics and saying, if you do not take feminism seriously, if you do not take women seriously and equal representation seriously, we're not going to wait and hang about anymore, and we will take matters into our own hands. And that's meant in a very friendly way. However, we will do. So today was great. It was also chaotic. I was chairing the first session this morning, and I'm sure this sounds familiar, because we're moving from an organic grassroots movement into trying to develop some accountability and structures without becoming bureaucratic, without replicating mainstream organisations or other political parties. It's quite a conundrum and a bit of a challenge. So this morning when I was chairing it, there's people throwing in ideas from the floor, and we're moving motions through the floor, and we're amending things from the floor, and you're making up standing orders on the hoof, and you're chairing it and you're going, oh wait a minute, we might need standing orders. And so I think the movement itself is in that position across all of it. But how are we going to keep the conversations going? How are we going to be able to discuss strategy in terms of what happens next in Scotland? How are we going to make sure that all the new voices and all the people who have been inspired through the referendum process are not silenced again and excluded again by mainstream politics? And for me, we didn't discuss this morning, for me, I do think that through the referendum we had some opportunity as a wider movement to get together to talk about strategy, but not enough. Not enough, and not in a way that respected each other's positions where they were coming from, whether that's political parties with huge memberships and a lot of power, or grassroots organisations, and to be able to negotiate in a kind of equal way about strategy in respect to the referendum. And I think where we go further and forward in terms of Scotland as a whole now, I think it would be useful to develop, we've got a wee bit more time now, useful to develop some sort of interface for communication about how we go forward, and how the interests and needs of Women for Independence, of RIC, of some of the other organisations that were involved in the wider Yes movement can be reconciled, how we can develop common goals and common strategies, but in a way that protects and preserves and respects the autonomy of each of the constituent parts. For me, that's new politics, and that's the kind of movement and structures that we need to develop. So